getting the interview and landing the job, right now on The Leadership Voice. Welcome to The Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show features how to get the interview and land the job. Joining us will be Alyssa Nemnick, Director of Talent Acquisition at Ventura Foods, and Greg Hauser, Executive Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Ingram Micro. We also have a leadership lesson being delivered by Dr. Sean Pickler. So let's start things off with today's quote of the day. Today's quote comes from Nelson Mandela. There is no passion to be found playing small, in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. Our first guest is Alyssa Nemnick. Alyssa is the Director of Talent Acquisition for Ventura Foods, a $3 billion food manufacturing company headquartered in Brea, California. A Southern California native, Alyssa graduated from UC Riverside with her bachelor's degree in economics. Upon graduating, she began her career in management, completing 2 different management training programs. Alyssa progressed in her career through various roles in operations management, eventually overseeing a $34 million region of offices spanning a 200-mile radius in the Bay Area. Then, in 2018, she joined the HR team at Ventura Foods in talent acquisition. Alyssa is active in the community and serves on the Center for Leadership's advisory board. It's a pleasure to welcome Alyssa Nemnick. Alyssa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jay. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. Let's just jump right in.
Sounds good.
Could you talk a little bit from the company's perspective on the difference or the distinction between recruiting and selection?
Sure, absolutely. Being in talent acquisition, it really is about a 50-50 when it comes to recruiting and actual selection. Given the market today, unemployment is its lowest since 1969. So we really need to do the work to get out there and find candidates and meet them where they are and get them to attract to our company, to our open positions. So the amount of recruiting and legwork that goes into that is pretty hefty compared to previous years. Once you get them, that's not enough, right? You actually have to make sure you're selecting with excellence. And being part of Ventura Foods, they're all about making sure that we have people that join our company that can really enhance our culture. So fit is very important to us. And to get to the right fit, you need the right selection process, the right criteria, and make sure that you're really evaluating the person from a skills level, from a cultural level, from a values level. Do our values speak to their values and vice versa?
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that balance between culture fit versus experience and background.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, we're all about that culture enhancement. You can have someone with excellent skills, and skills come in a variety of different ways. They can be technical skills, those hard skills, or they could be the soft skills like teamwork and leadership. Those are all really important when evaluating a candidate, and it really depends on the position. You could have excellent skills from a technical standpoint, and maybe the position warrants that. But ultimately, if you're not really going to fit with the rest of the team and really enhance what we can bring to the company and really help the company grow, it's not going to be as much of a slam dunk as, say, a candidate who maybe has some gap in terms of their skills that will need to have a learning curve. We're a lot more comfortable with someone to climb a learning curve from a skills perspective if they're the right fit from a values perspective, right? We know that they'll gel well with the team, that their guiding principles are the same as our guiding principles, and we'll help them climb that curve when they get into the company.
And so not every company might take the exact same approach.
True.
But it's fair to say that if you had to choose, culture fit would actually be a little more important.
Absolutely. I think so. Skills are changing too. And so if you have someone who's nimble but really fits well and really helps you enhance that culture that you have at your current company, you can invest in them and they'll get the skills.
Okay, so terrific. So how does an applicant, there's so many job postings, there's so many applicants, how does an applicant get noticed? How do they make sure that when they submit their their resume, put in their materials, that they get an interview?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I get that question all the time. I think number one, think about it this way. It all starts with a resume. It all starts with how you describe what you've done at previous companies or in previous experiences. You have the answers to the test in front of you. So that's the good news. You have the job description most of the time for what you're trying to apply to. Use it. Take that job description, pull out some of those keywords, and really emphasize that level of experience and skills that you have on your resume that match what's in the job description, and tailor that resume to the job that you're applying to. That'll help the recruiters who don't know you, they've never met you, it's not their fault. They're just reading a piece of paper and they're seeing if there's a match. That'll help them determine early on that there is a match. There's a lot of other things aside from the resume too, though. Really engaging with the company, making sure that you're following them and understanding what's going on, being apprised of new and open current roles. The sooner you can get in, the sooner the chance you have to get reviewed versus later on when a job has been posted for quite some time, you might get a little bit lower in the pile.
So if a person was using the same resume for every job, they're not doing themselves a favor, are they?
Definitely not. Definitely not. If you can pull out, again, everyone, I can say that I have leadership skills, or I can say I have leadership skills leading this size of a team. If it makes sense for that specific job, that's what you should emphasize and really pull out of there and get rid of some of the noise that doesn't necessarily fit that job.
Okay, terrific. So let's talk about how technology is changing
Perfect.
the recruiting process and how applicants need to be aware of how they use technology, and specifically social media and other job sites.
Yes, definitely. LinkedIn, I'm going to start there. It's really changed the game, right? Previously, you'd have to go figure out some kind of org chart, get your hands on an org chart and as a recruiter and find out who everyone is to get in touch with them. Now you just pull up their LinkedIn profile, find their title, and you can reach out to them with one click of a button. From a candidate standpoint, what does that mean? Recruiters use that tool and they use it for searching for the right talent. They're going to use the same kind of keywords that are in the job description that they're looking for that match. So when you have any kind of presence online, whether it's on Indeed or LinkedIn or any resume database, really, you want to make sure that you have the right keywords again, because the recruiter is going to be plugging those in to try to see what comes up in their search. So make it relevant. Don't not update your LinkedIn profile. Make sure you have the right information on there that will help get you pulled out of the noise to really be considered for a position. You can also network. Definitely build a network, and LinkedIn is a great way to do that, among other things, right? Facebook, there's a lot of different groups that you can join that help you stay apprised of what's going on in your industry and what you're interested in. So you can link up with people when you see an opening. It's much better to tap someone on the shoulder that you know and say, hey, can you get me in? Can I have a conversation with the hiring manager? Or what do you know about this job? A few other different technologies that are out there in different sites are sites like Glassdoor or Fairy Godboss, right? These are all these sites that do the reviews of the company. It's like a Yelp, right, for a company. I highly recommend candidates take a look at those with a grain of salt. A lot of times people are going in there because they're really angry or they're really happy. There's not usually a medium and somewhere in between there. So take it with a grain of salt, but do your research. Figure out what makes the company tick in any way you can, whether it's talking to other employees that currently work there or leveraging some of those sites.
So you've given some great insights that might help a person with their resume, might also help them in navigating some of the recruiting sites and the use of LinkedIn, for example. So then they get an interview, and everybody wants to succeed in an interview. And so I want to think about what advice we can give somebody to really do well in their interview. Could you talk a little bit about the biggest mistakes you have seen people make in interviews?
Definitely. I want to kind of balance this response. I don't want people to focus on what they shouldn't do. You should really pump yourself up and get ready for the interview when you go in. Read your resume. That's your biggest cheerleader right there, is talking about all the great things that you've done so far, and get yourself ready. Stand in front of the mirror, act proud, practice your smiling, practice your eye contact. Be prepared. Learn about the company before you go in. They'll ask you, we always ask, what do you know about the company? Why do you want to work here? Have a good story behind that too. Mistakes, I mean, they're pretty common, but there's really no knockout mistakes. Obviously, keep the professionalism professional. Even no matter how comfortable you feel with talking with whoever you're interviewing with, make sure you keep your language professional, your demeanor professional. Don't get frustrated. Just keep being able to show who you are and let your skills shine. Don't come in with really bold clothes and, loud makeup and things like that. You want your skills and experience and what you're saying to be the loudest thing in the room, not what you're wearing or how you're reacting to a question that you maybe didn't like.
Okay, no, that's great advice. Whenever I imagine these kinds of interview settings and the big mistakes that people make, I always imagine somebody coming in and talking about how terrible their last company was, or how awful their last boss was. Or
Definitely.
do you get a lot of folks doing things like that?
We do, and it's a tough thing to navigate, right? Because that emotion's real. You're coming. Why do you want to work here? Why do you want to leave your current job? That's a hard question.
I don't want to be around that last boss.
I don't want to be there anymore. Get me out. You have to practice that. Talk to your friends. Talk to other people, and say, how does this sound? How does it come off if I say this? You need to get your story right. Definitely. Do not trash talk your previous employer or your previous bosses. Make sure you have a balanced approach to that. Again, that remains professional, because ultimately, if you join that company and you leave that company, they're going to think you're going to start spreading some of the same type of
toxicity.
Negative, toxicity about their company as well. You don't want that to be perceived.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Sure.
You've given us some great insights for folks that want to get the interview and get the job. We're going to have you back on to take some questions from the audience in just a couple minutes. So thank you so much for being on the show, Alyssa.
Jay.
And now it's time for a featured segment of the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Today's Did You Know comes from careersadviceonline.com. The average person will change careers 5 to 7 times during their working life, according to career change statistics. In fact, with the ever-increasing number of different career choices available, approximately 30% of the total workforce will now change jobs every 12 months. It's now time for today's Leadership Countdown. Today's Leadership Countdown comes from Forbes.com. We bring you the top 4 reasons you didn't get the job. Number 4, you didn't position yourself properly. Number 3, you weren't qualified. Number 2, your resume isn't working in your favor. And the number 1 reason why you probably didn't get the job is that you were great, but someone else was even better. Read more at Forbes.com. Please stick around. We have Greg Hauser in the studio, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, is what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership, really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field. They have deep knowledge and research, but also, aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples, and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to the Leadership Voice. Our next guest is Greg Hauser, the Executive Director of Global Talent Acquisition for Ingram Micro. In his current role, Greg leads a team of talent acquisition professionals across the globe who facilitate cost-effective, efficient recruiting processes to develop robust talent pipelines and meet the organization's vast resource requirements. His focus is on recruitment analytics, talent branding, developing best-in-class recruitment teams, implementing process improvements, and client customer service and satisfaction around the world. Greg draws from over 15 years of recruiting experience in tactical and strategic roles at a number of Fortune 500 organizations. Throughout his career, Greg has helped organizations evolve their recruitment approach and strategy to further strengthen in-house expertise, leverage new channels and technologies, and refine recruitment analytics and key performance indicators. Greg has a Bachelor's of Science in Information Technology from Syracuse University, in addition to many professional certifications. This is his second time on The Leadership Voice, so let's please welcome Greg Hauser.
Hey, Jay.
Greg,
nice to be back.
It's so nice to have you on the
Thanks
show
for having
today.
me again.
Now, today we're going to be talking from the employee's standpoint. We're going to help employees get the interview and get the job.
Okay.
So let's jump right in. How can an applicant get your attention?
So there's a lot of ways in this day and age to get attention, right? And there's kind of table stakes that you need from the very beginning, which is putting together your resume. And I know Alyssa did a great job talking about how do you highlight the resume and whatnot. But the first thing is the application, right? So find out, where do you apply? What's the process in which you apply? Most companies in this day and age have an online system of application. There are some that still require you to send in an application. So find out what the company process is, number one. And then secondly is understand, what is the role you're applying for? Right? In the world of talent acquisition, from my perspective, I see hundreds, thousands of applications. So where does one stand out? It's number one, their background and skill set and what they're sending into the organization for the position we're looking for. There's a match in terms of the skills we're looking for, maybe the types of experience, the types of companies that we generally hire from, that sort of thing, right? And that's the table stakes. That gets your resume in the door for us to review. And at Ingram, every candidate is reviewed. That's number one, but that's not where you should stop and just wait for someone to call you back, right? There's a good chance we will, but at the same time, you need to be proactive.
So you don't just send the resume and then just wait.
That's the baseline. Anyone can just send a resume. So what I always encourage individuals to do is make a connection to the company. Look on LinkedIn, find individuals that are maybe are in this role and reach out to them. Or maybe find someone that's come from Cal State Fullerton that works at Ingram Micro and connect with them. Because at the end of the day, you have that connection to them being either a student, a grad student here, or maybe that you're interested in the type of work that the person's doing. So you reach out to them and get an introduction. Find out what the day in the life is, because that's another way into the organization. And that's just really the whole premise of networking. It's being proactive. It's making relationships or building relationships with a company even before you have the opportunity in interview. And sometimes that's coming to the actual campus and talking to different folks, just genuinely being interested in what the organization's doing and interested in an opportunity to work for that type of company.
And so if you were giving someone advice on how to get the interview, after they've submitted a resume, a lot of the things you've just talked about probably would be part of that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the natural progression, right? It all kind of, the goal is to get the interview. At the end of the day, you want the interview. Obviously, the end result is the job. Everyone wants the job. But more importantly, the competition is to get the interview. If you get the interview, you have a really good chance of getting that position. In our world of recruiting, at least from a position standpoint, we try to have 5 quality interviews to 1 maybe offer. And if we're really good, 3 quality interviews to 1 offer, meaning that's 3 candidates could be a pool of 100. So just getting the interview is an accomplishment that you should be happy about. But then it's the next step. You've got the interview, now how do you get the job? So there's the application part to focus on, right? Getting the introduction. Then it's getting the interview. How do you effectively do the best you possibly can to represent yourself and to show that you have interest and why the company wants to extend an offer to you to work for them. And then obviously the end result, which everybody's looking for, is the hire. But if you've really mastered the approach of sending in the resume based on what the company's looking for, connecting with individuals at the organization, getting the interview and really being very prepared for that interview, you're going to get multiple offers. So then it becomes now your opportunity to decide which one of these companies that you've applied to, if you've applied to multiple companies, do you decide to take the offer from? So, but it all starts from being as prepared as possible for the process in which you're trying to at least get the interview from the company.
And so once you get the interview, now then the next task is to then transition that to getting the offer. And so what tips can we give our viewers for making that interview really pay off?
Okay. Well, I think most importantly, you're most likely going to be working with a HR professional prior to the interview. So maybe someone from my team, like a talent acquisition or a recruiter or a coordinator. It's okay to ask questions about, well, how do I prepare for the interview? What's the dress attire like at the organization? Is there any, can you give me an advanced list of the people I'd be working or I'd be interviewing with? And maybe what's the type of interview? Is it a behavioral-based interview approach, meaning that they're going to ask me questions that I should answer with a example? Usually companies have that listed on their website. I know at Ingram's career site, we have a spot that you can click and it shows exactly how we interview and how we ask questions, so you can be prepared for that. But not every company is the same way, so it's okay to ask those questions. That's when you come into the interview, so that you're very prepared in terms of how you're going to answer questions based on your resume. The second thing I'd like to say is make sure you know your background. Make sure you know your story. Your story needs to stay consistent through the entire interview process, because what's going to happen is after the interviews, and you might have multiple people you meet with, they're all going to get together and talk about their interview. And if the story starts changing along the way, that's when questions come up saying, well, I'm not really sure that this person actually did what they said they're doing, because they told multiple different types of stories along the way. So I always like to encourage folks to understand their resume, the story they're going to tell about the experiences they have, and stay consistent. Don't overemphasize something you didn't do, because that will come out during the interview. We actually train our managers to dig deep when we receive answers from individuals. So it's one thing to say, hey, I led this huge project at school that developed an e-commerce website. But when you start digging in, maybe you were just part of the project team, you weren't leading that. Or maybe you were, but it's still a critical piece. But don't overemphasize that you led the whole thing, because the reality is you didn't, and we found that out during the interview process.
Right. And also, I guess if you're interviewing with several different people and they're asking you the same questions, it's okay to give the same answer.
Absolutely. And you can even say, this is a similar question that the first interviewer asked, and I'll talk a little bit about that experience, and maybe I'll give you another example as well. It's okay to reference that you've been asked these types of questions during the process. It shows that you're listening, number one, which is a good thing from an employer standpoint, and that you're ready to answer the question. You're not going to just stick to one specific example. Right. It's okay to have multiple, and that goes back to being prepared coming into the interview.
So if you think about the interviews that the candidate should soon forget, or the mistakes that interviewees have made, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen candidates make in an interview?
That's hard to say, because I know
you don't have to say their name.
Well, I was going to tell you a specific no, I'm just kidding. No, I've seen a lot of things. I've seen candidates showing up late. I've seen something happened during the interview, just being so nervous that they couldn't even answer a question, and kind of breaking down during an interview. Now,
so there's no crying during interviews?
Well, you can cry, but it just makes it a really awkward interview, right? At the end of the day, that happens, and everyone's human. Things happen, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to be selected for the job. We're not hiring robots. We don't want someone to just be meep, burp, mom, answer the question, and that's it. We realize that people are people, but there are some things we can control. And if the things you can't control, or things that you can control, you're not able to control, that's when things don't go as planned. But the reality is, sometimes I'd say the biggest mistakes that people make is that they put things on their resume that they didn't do. especially when it comes to technical skills. If you're interviewing for a technical position and you've listed technology in your resume and you do not know how to talk in depth about what that technology is, it's going to come out. And sometimes it's embarrassing because you've almost, I don't want to say you lied on your resume, but you falsified what your skill sets are. And that's not, during an interview, that's really a bad spot to be in, because at the same time, the interviewers can say, you know what, you don't have the skills we need halfway through. And that's a tough call to make, because you've already passed all of the other tests to get to the job. So I always like to say, make sure you know everything that's on that resume, including grammatical errors, punctuation, everything. We look at everything. That's your one piece of paper you submit to us that we're basing a lot of things off of. You got to make sure it's 100% accurate and 100% correct.
Okay, so let's talk about technology.
Yeah.
Because technology is changing the way recruiting is taking place, and applicants need to be aware of how this technology affects them.
Yep.
Could you talk about some of the technological changes that are happening in the recruiting industry?
Absolutely, and I'm a technology person. I came out of school studying technology. In fact, I wanted to be a software developer and system engineer when I graduated.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
I'm far from that, but but I love technology. But you're absolutely right. I mean, technology is changing the world, right? Let's face it. Now, obviously, technology's enhancing the way that we're looking at candidates in the process as well. It's helping us find more candidates than ever before. It connects us to candidates through job sites and everything else. But really, there's a lot of new innovation that's coming out as it relates to artificial intelligence, some of video screening interviews, facial recognition, if you can imagine. There's a lot of companies doing that as well. So these new technologies are being implemented into the process. And really, it is to speed up the process, to get to the quality candidates that we want to have interviews as fast as possible. In fact, at Ingram, we do have an artificial intelligence bot, if you will, that's part of our interview process for one of our high volume positions, where we receive a lot of applicants for the role. It's the initial touch point to the candidate from Ingram, where we start asking them kind of the basic qualifying questions into the role via text message. And what we found is, number one, we're able to talk to many candidates 24/7, 7 days a week. That type of response is amazing. Whereas you could send a resume into a job or a company's career site and maybe hear back 2 days later, maybe not even hear back at all. But to think you can start to have an interaction with a company within minutes of applying, that's the power of technology. And we're able to engage in them very quickly into our brand. And the end result is we're able to offer them an interview, a phone interview at the end of that discussion. So what happens is a candidate goes through, answers a few questions, takes about maybe 2 minutes via text. And if they successfully meet the requirements, their basic requirements, they get a calendar link that's set right to a recruiter's calendar. And they can select what time is right for them. They set the calendar, and guess what? The recruiter calls them when that time is up. So that's a way of they saying, wow, I'm already one step into the process. I'm going to talk to an individual at Ingram. And it's proven to be very successful. So that's one type of technology that we're introducing into the workplace. It's been very successful. But there's others, just in terms of automation, in terms of how we look at candidates through the interview process, and screening for core competencies and everything else. A lot of that's being automated.
So how does a candidate be better prepared for that initial interview with the bot?
It's something you can really prepare for. I mean, we're in the day and age where text messaging is everything, right? So as long as you can text, I think you'll do fine, because the questions are basic. It talks about the role that they're applying to, just to validate that the role you sent your resume in is truly the role you're interested in. Because that goes back to what we talked about earlier, that sometimes candidates just blindly apply to every position, right? That you're wasting time. You really are. And just hoping that someone calls you back if you hit the right position that matches your resume. But the reality is we get so many applications that we want to make sure that the one we're interviewing for, number one, you're excited about, you know exactly what it is, and that you're qualified for it with the minimum qualifications that we're looking for. So.
Terrific. So maybe we could talk about, from a company's perspective, every company's different.
All right.
But talk a little bit about the balance from a talent acquisition perspective, the balance between background, skills, and culture fit.
Right. You know, I think it's hard to say exactly. It's not an exact science, I will say. It's not an exact number. You know, at the very beginning, we try to look for the background and skill set that meets the job. Now, I know a lot of the audience here is early in their career and they maybe not have the background, right? So that might not necessarily be the role that they're applying for. We might not necessarily emphasize background as a key component, right? Maybe the university is one that we are really interested in, which we are. And so that might be one component that we're like, okay, well, that's one piece, great education that can translate into our workforce. So that will weigh a portion of it. And then the role that they're applying for, do they have some of the experiences that would make sense for that type of role? So if there's a role that's maybe heavily customer service oriented, or dealing in a more of a support coordination type role, there are certain roles that you can do in the rest of the world that mirror perfectly, right? Fast food, being a barista at a Starbucks, or anyone that's dealing with the public, those are key talents that actually make up what a core role that's dealing in support in an organization. They're very transparent. So I have a lot of people ask me, Greg, I've only worked at Starbucks. Is that okay for me to put on my resume? Absolutely. Based on the role that you're applying, if it's customer service oriented, they know you've had that experience. And that's a key point. And so that's one. And then obviously when you come into the organization, the element of who you are, what you're all about, right? That goes into your core values, which I know we talked about earlier in the show. Core values, what you believe in, how the company treats their associates. What is the vibe you get when you walk into the office? Is it really quiet and no one's making a sound and it's really light? Or is it really vibrant, right? And it's exciting, because some people like that quiet office, right? Where others like to be involved, where the energy is. These are little hidden clues that you should be attuned to when you walk into an office. It's just, how do they greet the receptionist? Are people friendly? Are they talking to you as you don't even work there? Are they talking to you like, hey, welcome to Ingram? Does it feel like a friendly environment, right? So that's the other element that you'll get, that you should pick up as a candidate, but we also pick up when we're talking to you. We want you to be yourself. So.
And one of the things that you've alluded to is the notion that the candidate should really be paying attention. The candidate should be looking. In many ways, a lot of candidates may not realize that they are also interviewing the company. Could you talk a little bit about how applicants should be prepared to ask the questions?
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Right. So one of the things is that there is a lot of opportunity in Orange County, and really opportunity that's out all over the U.S. So you as an applicant, you do have to figure out, where do you want to invest your time? I mean, you gave some statistics earlier about people changing jobs every 12 months and changing careers 7 or 8 times. Yeah, I understand that, but we also look for individuals that are there for the long run. I've been with Ingram Micro almost 8 years now, so that's where I want to. We want to find folks that we invest in long term. But really, the way that you're interacting, the way that you're talking, you're asking questions, very important, because that's your time to ask the questions. In fact, when we interview candidates and they don't have any questions to ask after the interview's over, that's almost a red flag, because I couldn't have possibly answered all your questions that you may have had, during the process, just by asking you interview questions. So be prepared to ask the questions. Talk to the receptionist when you come in to meet with the organization. Ask them questions, because guess what? I asked the receptionist, hey, how did that candidate interact with you? Right? Were they polite? Were they, because those are key things that we pick up on. It's the way you are when the spotlight's not on you, I think, is really what shows who you are. And that's the reality, is be yourself through the process, because you could put on a show for the interview and we could hire you, but then at the end of the day, those are the candidates that don't last very long at an organization, because you're not who you were when you showed up for the interview too. So that's another key thing to remember. Be yourself. And if it's the right place for you, you'll get the job and you'll enjoy it. But I don't want to artificially inflate something that's not, because you might not be happy.
No, that's great. And we have to remember that fit really does go in both directions.
Absolutely.
And just
Very key.
as a company is looking for someone that's a fit, the applicant should also look for an organization that is a good fit.
Right.
Terrific. Well, Greg, I want to thank you for being on the show. I know you're going to be back in just a couple minutes because we're going to do our panel Q&A session. So I want to thank you for joining us. And now it's time for our leadership example. Today, with the help of Fortune.com, we bring you the 50 best workplaces in Southern California. It's now time for today's leadership lesson. Today's leadership lesson will be delivered by Dr. Sean Pickler. So let's take 3 minutes and learn about recruiting from the applicant's perspective.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sean Pickler, and here is today's leadership lesson. Today I'll be talking about value propositions, how they're related to how firms select employees, and how job applicants select employers. So a lot of the consulting work that I do is related to human resources consulting. When firms ask me how they can improve their HR management processes, I always start with the question, well, what's your value proposition? I ask this question because this helps firms attract job applicants whose background and preferences are a good fit to that particular firm. This is what's known as person-organization fit. Person-organization fit is important for a long list of reasons. It's tied to employee attitudes and engagement, employee health and well-being, and even firm performance. Different firms have different value propositions or characteristics that make them uniquely attractive as employers. Job applicants, too, they have different value propositions, which make them more or less suitable to different employers. So let's consider two famous companies that are key competitors, Google and Microsoft. As an employer, Google stands out on two key dimensions, benefits and culture. Google is known as a great place to work because employees have access to unique benefits like on-site medical staff, paid paternity leave, sleep pods, and a really supportive work culture. So Google's value proposition in a nutshell is that it's a really fun, engaging, and supportive place to work. Google's particularly good for job applicants who like to work in teams, whose personalities are characterized by openness to new experience and agreeableness, and who are intellectually curious. Microsoft is famous for emphasizing pay for performance as a key part of its value proposition. As Stephen Miller wrote for the Society for Human Resource Management, Microsoft's pay for performance philosophy recognizes that top performers provide the highest value to the firm. Microsoft is particularly good for job applicants who are competitive, who are assertive, and who are really willing to go the extra mile for incentives. Google and Microsoft are both able to attract some of the highly talented job applicants in the world, but what they're looking for from their employees differs. This is something that job applicants should consider. What is your unique value proposition to a potential employer? In addition to your technical qualifications, what sort of soft skills do you bring to the table that set you apart from other job applicants? So really do your homework when it comes to value propositions. Be sure to carefully research companies. Look at what they have to offer in their employment relationship. Ask recruiters about their firm's value proposition and be able to clearly articulate your value proposition. In the end, try to choose an employer where your person-organization fit will be the highest. I'm Sean Pickler, and this has been today's Leadership Lesson.
Thank you, Dr. Pickler, for today's leadership lesson. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Q&A. Viewers, do you need some leadership advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show we take questions from you, our viewers, and we answer them right here on the show. Today we have 3 questions for our guests, and our first question is for Alyssa, and it comes from David in Covina, California. David asks, is there value in applying to a company even if there's no position posted? How would that work?
It's an interesting question, right? Usually you're used to applying to something that's open that you're interested in. But there are some companies that have what's called talent communities, where when you go to the company because you're interested, but you don't see anything quite posted with what matches your skill set, you can join their talent community, enter your email, create a profile, upload your resume so that you're in their database, but then get notified right away when something opens that matches what you're looking for. I think that's a great idea. If you're in the driver's seat and knowing what companies you want to go to and they notify you right away you're one of those first applicants in, I think that could definitely give you a leg up. What I will say is, don't just find a position that kind of matches what you do and just apply to try to get your foot in the door. It's just a waste of time. I think Greg put it earlier that you don't want to just, that's a ticket to entry. So you really want to do a little more work than that behind the scenes if you're serious about being considered for the company.
Okay, Greg, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. So there's a talent community, talent network. A lot of companies have it. And again, it's just to become, and I would say also follow them on different
Yes.
Social media elements, whether it's LinkedIn. A lot of the companies will post what their Twitter following is or Facebook following. Just start to get involved with their community, understand their brand, connect with folks there. You know, the idea that there's never a job, if the job's not open, that doesn't mean it's not open. There could be a role that's open internally that the external public doesn't even see. So how do you network with an organization to see if there's opportunity for you to do it, especially if you know what you want to do, right? So if I'm if I want to be an accountant, right, and I have some background in some schoolwork in accounting, and I want to be either an intern or maybe an accountant 1, but there's nothing posted, what do I do, right? Well, you do what we just talked about, get involved, follow, but then start connecting to maybe people that are in accounting at that company. Because you never know. Well, they'll see that you're interested. They might have an opportunity that's just not posted, or maybe it's coming down the line in 2 or 3 months. So it's just getting in front of them and building that relationship before the opportunity even exists.
So reaching out to folks at a company that you're interested in, even if there's not a job,
Right.
connect in people that are in roles similar to what you might want to be in, that's a good move.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But just don't be creepy and annoying, right? There are individuals, right? They're working their working lives, and then they have their personal lives after. Don't expect that they're going to stop everything and call you back. But it's the art of trying to make a connection with someone you don't know, and you need to get good at doing that, especially if you want to work your way through and move up in an organization.
Terrific. So our second question is for Greg, and it comes from Vin in Encino, California. Vin asks, most jobs seem to require 3 to 5 years of experience in a job. But to get that experience, someone has to hire you without experience. So how do I get myself qualified in this chicken or egg dilemma?
Well, Vin, great question, right? The reality is, I think the baseline, unless it's an entry-level position, the baseline is 3 to 5 years experience. But then it's how do you define experience, right? Personal experience, professional experience, work experience, volunteering experience. It all makes up for whatever that role is that you're looking for. But the reality is too, they might be looking for someone that has 3 years at a minimum experience in a corporate environment, in which case you probably won't be qualified for that position, right? But how do you get that experience? Where do you go to start to build your portfolio? And it could be volunteering. It doesn't have to be a paid job. It could be volunteering. It could be an internship. It could be so many different things to get the experience. And most likely you need to earn and put the time in order to be qualified for the role that you're applying for. But at times as well, they might say, well, that experience is one thing, but they have educational experience that we say, hey, you have a master's, we're saying that's about 3 years experience, right? So sometimes your education and what you've already done actually qualifies you for the role. So I wouldn't just take what's on that job profile and just say whether or not you're going to apply based on 3 to 5 years experience. Think about, well, is the education I've done and some of my experiences, does it qualify me for the baseline, which is 3? because I don't know how many people I've actually excluded from the process because they've had 2 or 1.5 years experience, right? That's not necessarily the cutoff point, right? Because there's other things we want to find out in the process. So don't get discouraged by that, but also look at opportunities where you can get that experience.
Okay, Alyssa?
I completely agree. We see the same thing.
Okay.
You
We're
guys
on the
agree.
same page.
See,
Must be
Yeah,
true then. It
yeah.
Must be true.
I think the key is to understand your transferable skills, right? So there's also skills that specifically require a certain years doing those skills. But if you have those skills in other areas that could translate into what they're requesting, I think absolutely apply. But make sure that your resume and what you're talking about really chimes in on that and really highlights that.
Terrific. So our third question is from Sue in Long Beach, California. Sue asks, how do I toe the line between being confident but also humble in a job interview? And similarly, how do I toe the line between not seeming desperate but also not seeming disinterested?
It's a great question.
Towing the line.
Yes, it's tough. It's hard, and we see it across the board from a variety of different levels of candidates. It's not just at the entry level. I've seen vice presidents struggle through this during an interview of the balance between confidence and overly confident and also disinterest. So you definitely want to be confident. Confidence is key. If you're confident in your abilities and what you bring to the table, the people interviewing will catch on to that confidence and be confident in your ability to do the job. Also, don't be overly confident, right? Don't focus on the I. You need to be able to start talking about how you accomplish things together and worked cross-functionally and partnered with other people to get some things done in addition to what you were able to bring to the table. A disinterested candidate I've definitely seen too. I've heard things said like, I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I'm hoping to get my foot in the door. I'm trying to break into this industry. What that tells me is that you're probably not going to be here for that long. You're going to get whatever experience you want just to get your foot in the door and then move on to the next thing. So try to avoid situations like that or comments like that and really focus on why you want to join the company. Have a compelling story for why you want this role. How does it translate into your overall career? Why do you like the company? That'll really show us that you're interested, and make sure that you're confident in your abilities. Read your resume, get pumped.
Okay,
Yeah.
towing the line, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, so very similarly, I think I completely agree. I think most importantly, be yourself, right? Don't be someone that you think they want to see, because that never really ends up well, and then it kind of unravels after a number of different interviews, right? So be yourself. If you're uncomfortable in that setting, right, it's nerve-wracking. You feel like the world's kind of crushing in on you. You have to give the best answer possible. Just practice getting into uncomfortable situations. I think some of your students asked me this before, is how do I get that confidence so that I can actually, because I am confident, I just can't exude that in the interview because I get all nervous. And so my answer to that is, well, you're not training enough to understand that situation, how to act in that situation. It's like building a muscle. It's like working out. You're not just going to overnight or work one time and get big, strong muscles. It takes time, and it takes stretching and really exuding and getting yourself into uncomfortable situations to strengthen your ability to communicate. And so I think that's one of the things I always like to tell individuals is they feel like if they're not being confident enough, they're confident they know the material, but they're not confident in presenting it. You got to get out and challenge yourself. And I think one of your students, we did a 30-day challenge where every day you put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. You ask someone something that you would never ask, just to either get rejected or to get whatever you asked for. And that will build your confidence over time. So practicing like that helps. And I think the only one other piece to it is, there is a thing about being confident, and you talked about being overconfident. It's okay to tell the individual that you failed at someone. Some people are so afraid to tell that they failed at something, right? They're only talking about, oh, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this. I've never made a mistake. And the reality is, we make mistakes. I made a mistake, coming here today to the studio. I was a little bit late, right? It's a mistake I made. Okay, move on. But
now everyone knows.
Exactly. Well, I know now they know. Sue knows now for sure. But the reality is, it's okay. You've made mistakes, but what did you learn from that mistake? And how do you apply it into another situation, right? So that makes you real, and that comes across in the interview as well.
And so the other part of the question, the second part of the question, was about feeling too overly eager or potentially even desperate versus sort of standoffish or almost disinterested.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that balance of wanting to convince the employer that you're interested, that you want to join, but also not wanting to become too desperate sounding?
I think, I mean, it's probably just being even keel. Ask questions as well as what the process is. I know you might be really wanting this job, and you could say, you know what, I'm really excited about this opportunity, this company. I'm talking to different folks, but what I've learned in this meeting today, and what I've learned on, you know, what I've looked at online, and everything else, just, you know, makes it so much more that I'm excited about this opportunity. You're genuine. It's not, oh, I really need this job, right? That comes off as that desperateness that you're talking about. And that's, I mean, sometimes that's fine, but when it comes down, if two qualified candidates, you know, at the table, really, it's how the interaction was, and how did you leave the interview and the impression that you gave. So stay cool, calm, collective. That's really all we say. Ask questions. If you need to have an answer by a certain date, it's okay to tell them, this is what I'm expecting because I have other opportunities in process. Hopefully, you know, if there's other things we can do, just let me know. That puts the ball into the employer's court to get back to you. So.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that, make sure that, you know, you have the story of why you want to work there, and to not come across overly eager. I think it's really critical. You talked about this earlier in your segment about asking questions, and you touched on it briefly right now. If you ask questions, it shows that you're still evaluating the company. You're still really making an educated decision about joining the company. That does not speak desperation to me. If you're asking me about our culture and really heavy-hitting questions that'll help determine if you want to join or not.
I want to thank you both for being on the show and answering our questions. Thank you. This has been the Leadership Voices Q&A. Thank you to our guests for helping us with today's questions. If you have a question or need advice, send us your questions here to the Leadership Voice by email, leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu, or by Twitter at CSUF_leadership. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we talked about how to get that dream job. Thank you to our guests, Alyssa Nemnick and Greg Hauser, and a special thank you to Professor Sean Pickler for delivering today's leadership lesson. Join us each episode of the Leadership Voice as we will bring you new themes to guide your leadership development. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership at Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on the Leadership Voice.